Stanley Hall was a psychologist perhaps best known as the first American to earn a PhD in psychology, and for becoming the first president of the American Psychological Association. He also had a significant influence on the early development of psychology in the United States. Through his work as a teacher, he influenced a number of other leading psychologists including John Dewey and Louis Terman. Granville Stanley Hall was born in the United States in Asheville, Massachusetts on February 1st in 1844 on his parents' farm. His father, Granville Bascom Hall, served in the Massachusetts legislature, and his mother, Abigail Beals, studied at the Albany Female Seminary and taught school. They passed on to their son their love of learning, as well as a strong sense of religious piety, and Hall grew up determined to make a contribution to the world. He initially planned to become a minister, so he studied to become a pastor in the Christian ministry, just to leave the ministry after only 10 weeks. After a couple of years teaching philosophy and literature at Antioch College, he eventually found his way to Harvard University, where under the guidance of William James and H.P. Bowditch, he was awarded the first American PhD in psychology. He then gave special lectures on education at Harvard, and he used questionnaires from a study of Boston schools to write two significant papers, one dealing with children's lives in 1882 and the other with the contents of children's minds in 1883. Hall studied briefly in one's experimental lab, noted as the first experimental psychology lab in the world. While G. Stanley Hall initially began his career teaching English and philosophy, he eventually took a position as a professor of psychology and pedagogics at Johns Hopkins University. Among his many accomplishments was the creation of the American Journal of Psychology in 1887, the first such American journal and the second of any significance outside Germany. During his time at Johns Hopkins, he also established America's first experimental psychology lab. The philosopher, psychologist, educator John Dewey was one of the first ones to use it. Hall was entering the most influential period of his life. The following year, in 1888, he helped to establish Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, and as the university's president and a professor of psychology, he became a major force in shaping experimental psychology into a science. He envisioned Clark as a major graduate school and invited a number of leading scholars to join the faculty, including anthropologist Franz Boas and biologist C.O. Whitman. The accidental asphyxiation of Hall's wife and daughter in 1890 left him raising his 4-year-old son alone. Yet over the course of the next decade, he made some of his most significant contributions to the new science of psychology. He developed his influential concept of genetic psychology based on evolutionary theory and solidified his reputation as a leading educational reformer. In 1892, Hall was elected as the first president of the American Psychological Association. As a great teacher, he inspired research that reached into all areas of psychology. By 1893, he had awarded 11 of the 14 doctorates in the psychology granted in the United States. The first journal in the fields of child and educational psychology, the Pedagogical Seminary, later the Journal of Genetic Psychology, was founded by Hall in 1893. Hall is attributed with coining the phrase adolescence to describe the period of development between puberty and adulthood. His work was well received, and he was among the first to explore child psychology as a branch of psychological development. His most popular work was published in 1904 entitled Adolescence, Its Psychology and Its Relations to Physiology, Anthropology, Sociology, Sex, Crime, Religion, and Education. Before Hall, very little research had been conducted on the developmental period of adolescence. Hall believed that between the ages of 14 and 24, we undergo a period of storm and stress, where we experience intense feelings of ambition and rebellion that will lead to a lot of suffering as we head towards maturation. He emphasized, however, that reaching maturation was not the end, and it's important to note that even after we mature, we continue to develop. After his retirement in 1920, Hall wrote a companion volume on aging. This important account has been labeled prophetic in its recognition of an emerging crisis of aging in the 20th century, in which longer lifespan, narrowing family roles, and expulsion from the workforce combine to dramatically isolate the elderly and restrict their active participation in public life. Hall railed against this process, arguing that the wisdom conferred by old age meant that the elderly had valuable and creative contributions to make to society. Yet, the stigma of aging meant that, instead, many were engaged in the foolish pursuit of youth, trying to avoid being excluded from full participation in their communities. In the conclusion of the book, Hall expressed a tangible sense of personal anger against this form of discrimination. His theory called for a better understanding of the aging process, anticipated the development of gerontology, and his critique of the marginalization of the elderly still resonates today. In total, he published 489 works covering most of the major areas of psychology, including Senescence, The Last Half of Life in 1922, and Jesus the Christ in Light of Psychology in 1917. Life and Confessions of a Psychologist in 1923 was his autobiography, and he died on April 24 in 1924.